Hello, I'm Jessie Gray. Welcome to Personalities. I have a special guest this evening. I have no idea what we're going to talk about. I must say I took the leeway of not preparing quite as much as I might have for someone I didn't know, because the person I have as a guest I know very well. He's my husband, Don Gray. He has his own show, Artist and Critic, here on Manhattan Cable Television. Sundays when, Don?
6 p.m. on Channel C, and then it's replayed on Tuesday afternoons at 3:30.
3:30. We can barely remember when her own shows are on. Aside from having a show on Manhattan Cable, Don is also an artist, and I must say, I think a very fine one. So we're going to be talking about your art tonight, Don, and I guess just a mishmash of everything.
Sure.
Just for people who don't know, how long have you been painting?
Well, I started really seriously studying art when I was a sophomore in college, and I'm dating myself.
Would you care to say how many years ago that was?
I have to think a minute. That was 1954, so it's about 23 years now.
And you've been painting ever since?
Yeah, I was always very serious about it, so there's a tendency to demean and undervalue student work, but the idea of someone's a student.
Not by a student.
I believe it. So I count that as part of my endeavor.
When did we meet? That was when you were a junior, so I met you almost a year or two after you began studying.
Yeah, we were.
Not that we saw each other very frequently then at the beginning.
There was a hiatus there after the initial contact.
Of at least 4 years.
Yeah.
So
we had a close encounter of
a very third kind. Well, we can get into that later, but
if we dare.
Oh, let's dare. When did art, when it came into your life at that age, was it very serious? Did you know this is it?
Well, yeah, it was very serious. Anybody who watches my show know that I'm seriously involved in it.
But at that age?
Yeah, I was very serious about it. It meant something to me. I didn't know what I'd be able to do in it, but it didn't matter in that sense. I never had a brilliant technique, shall we say. I never had a brilliant grasp of the aesthetics of art, but I had a deep need for it, and I think a certain expressive strength that gave it significance even when it was crude and clumsy. So I identify in my own teaching, for example, with someone who is maybe clumsy and struggling, but who has some of that expressive power that really makes art significant. So yeah, it meant something to me right from the beginning.
What I'm trying to say is, how did you went into art because you didn't know what to major in, and your mother said, why not try art? Yeah. Unlike most parents who pick something very practical. She was artistic enough herself to recommend that, and obviously she saw something in you that made her say it. But when you picked up the brush, did you think, I found it?
No, not really. It was so difficult. I mean, it was such a struggle. I can remember the first day.
Did you think maybe this isn't it?
No, it wasn't that. I mean, I knew I wanted to do it, but there was no flash of recognition. I can remember just an example of my own naivete and immaturity and just plain childishness was that I'd drawn all my life, but it wasn't really from nature. It was from imagination, as kids will do, and from sporting pictures of ball players. I was big into sports, and cartoons, the typical garbage that kids draw, but they don't know it's garbage. And I remember the first time I met the teacher, I was very hesitant. I said, gee, I don't know if I can draw. All I've ever drawn is from photographs, and really I think I was talking about Donald Duck or Porky Pig or something like that. But, and here I am, I'm criticizing the photorealists. Maybe I shouldn't, or maybe for a good reason. I left it far behind me when I was 18. Criticizing the pop artists
with Donald Duck.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's how it began, with complete naivete and almost simple-mindedness, but a certain intensity and a need, and I think the need gave it validity, and I think now that I've acquired some technical expertise, the need is still there, and I think that enhances the validity, and all the experience I've had, as any artist has, makes the work more significant now.
Where do you think you learned the most? did you learn the most in school? Did you learn your most on your own? Where did you learn how to paint?
Well,
How did you learn how to paint?
Well, I learned to paint by painting, as far as I've learned to paint. I mean, there's an awful long way to go for me, and I just feel that I'm making a significant statement. I've reached a maturity, but it's an early maturity, and I have a long way to go. I'm 42, and it's been a hell of a struggle. I didn't feel like I had gotten my feet on the ground artistically until I was about 30 or so. So it's still a struggle, but I haven't really made my major statement yet. If I live long enough, I will.
Do you sometimes feel that you won't?
Oh yeah, very much so. I think I've always felt that I wouldn't live that long.
I know you do, but I think you will.
I'm here. I'm still here, and I didn't think I'd be here at this age. So I figure that.
You don't feel that you have made any major statements?
Yeah, I have made major statements.
I definitely feel that you have.
But I haven't made the ultimate major statement that I'm capable of and that I will make. It's just a question that it's taken me a long time to lay my foundation. And I mean, I can say that there are works 15 or 20 years ago that had great significance and will have great significance when it's reviewed in the total context of my work, but it doesn't, there's farther to go. In other words, I'm asking you questions that I already know. Do you feel satisfied with where you are now? Can you reach a sense of satisfaction in your work, that you feel good about this period of it? Or are you constantly dissatisfied and groping for something more, or I won't say new, more? I'm both satisfied and dissatisfied, if that's possible. I'm satisfied that individual pieces, as they come out day by day, I'm making a significant statement. I know I am. I can feel it. I can see it. You know, in contrast to the young artist who just does things from instinct, from passion, from need, and you can't look at what you've done and say, oh my God, look what I did. You did it, and it's sort of hazy, the achievement, and you're not quite sure what you achieved. Now, I still have the need, but I have the intellectual maturity to assess what I've done. I can see symbolically the statement I'm making, perhaps. Maybe I can see the loneliness, or I can see the emotionalism, or I can see the restriction, or I can see what I'm saying. You know, if I get myself into...
You feel that you can objectively, if that's possible for someone who's painted it, objectively?
Not totally, but much more than when you're a younger artist. I think you're still totally involved in it, but you get a little more distance from it, and you can see what you're doing. And you're satisfied in that you know you're making a statement, you're making an achievement, but you're dissatisfied because you know that farther beyond there is a significant achievement
that you haven't reached.
Yeah, higher in significance, or if not higher, richer or deeper in significance that you haven't yet achieved. And that's what is dissatisfying. It's disturbing.
Does it disturb you? Does it also spur you on? Does it make you
exactly what it does. It
excited about the future?
It doesn't make. I'm very depressed about the future.
No, you aren't excited.
I don't believe in the future.
Excited is the wrong word.
Look, you run the camera, and don't worry about what you're hearing. Okay. Okay. The future is you know, there's only death in the future. I hate to be this depressing, and if people are depressed, they can turn it off. But this is there's only death, and there's only dissolution, and there's only futility in the sense. See, my artistic experience has taught me that there are very few people who are going to appreciate what any artist of significance does. I think I'm an artist of significance. It's always possible that a person can delude themselves, and you constantly question yourself, and you ask yourself that. But there will be very few people who know what I've done, just as there will be very few people who know what I'm doing now, just as there are very few people, I suspect, who will know what a later guest of yours, Philip Sherrod, is doing and has done. It's part of the dilemma of human existence, and I think about it very much and have been in contact with it very much because I've had to face it so much. You know,
Are you
I've been
painting?
through it so thoroughly. You know, I've been through the mill in its positive and negative aspects so thoroughly that it's a significant part of my life.
Are you painting for those people those few people you say who will understand, who do understand now, who will understand in the future? Or are you painting for yourself? Would you go on painting
yes,
if
I would.
no one understood
Yes, I would.
it? So who are you painting for?
I'm painting for myself, but just as it's not possible for an individual to live alone without human companionship, it is extremely difficult. Did I say it's not possible? It's possible, but it's extremely difficult not only to live without human companionship, but to live, to create your work, this living, vital entity that you feel, at least, is living and vital, without sharing it, without other people understanding what you've done. You know, thank God that there are a few, but my experience is that there are very, very few who understand what the significant artists have done.
You know, I want to go on and say, hasn't that always been true for many artists?
Yes, it is.
But before, so that this isn't just all words, let's go to your work. And I'd like to hold this painting up to the camera and see if we can get it without a glare on it. I personally think this is one of your major works.
Well, maybe we can get a close-up of it.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, okay. We'll just hold it here for a second. Don, this was done about, what, 2 years?
No, I think it's time is fleeting. I think it's 4 or 5 years now. I'm constantly changing, and this, in a sense, isn't representative of what I'm doing now. But
we can't get it all on the camera at once, but we'll just pan up and down it maybe.
That's all right. I was very angry at the greed and commercialism of the art world, and this is essentially what this statement is. The hand at the lower, I use this to open my own show.
Try to get my hand.
So that it's very perhaps familiar to those who have seen my program. That, you know, the hand offers the dollar to the artist in his studio, which is me, and it's the intrusion of the commercial art world, offering its blandishments, offering its temptations to, yes, artists, succumb to the greed of the times, desert your own sensation, as Cézanne would say, desert your own destiny, whatever it will be, for the success that the crowd will give you, you know, and presumably the artist tries to paint on being himself or herself in the studio, fighting off these. Now, you know, of course, there are artists who, my style, being concerned with realism and so forth, is completely unfashionable, so I haven't exactly had to fight off the clamoring crowds to, who want to, you know, give me money or make me famous or whatever it might be.
Can I explain this painting?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's okay. Go back to the other camera and I'll just stick my... This is your hand.
Yes.
Then this is a book reflected into a mirror, and everything else we see past this book, this outside jacket, is a mirror.
Yeah.
So that this is the inside of the book in the mirror.
Yeah.
You are looking at so this is you reflected in the mirror. These two people are just actually portraits of people in a painting that happens to be stacked behind there, and there are a great many details. This is you holding out the dollar bill, which of course is this dollar bill.
Yeah.
You were seeing your hand here, then looking directly into the mirror for all of the rest of this. There are very obvious, I mean, just the use of the mirror, the dollar bill, perhaps these two little figures back here, and the details of a still life that is on the table here. There's a lot of symbolism in this, and there's a lot of symbolism in most of your still lives, and indeed, I think, all of your work.
Yeah.
Is that conscious?
Well, some of it's conscious and some of it's unconscious, and as I was saying earlier, some of it just feels right as you do it, and you see what you did afterwards, you know? I mean, I'm not sure now whether I consciously juxtapose the dollar with the two saints, you know, Pontormo's two saints, two frescoes. I was aware of the difference between the two saints and this inner flyleaf of the book. That's why I opened it to that after just flipping through.
And what is this?
Well, it's just, it symbolizes greed, you know, monstrous creature. Well, I'm not sure who painted the picture, but they're just the expressions on their faces, and they're reaching on.
It's a crowd of grasping people with their arms outstretched.
Yeah, it suggested greed, and there's a little detail of a painting with some chicken heads on a plate that I did, and it suggests some of the corruption and the decadence of life. You know, I mean, there's something pristine and whole about the still life and real and solid about it, and perhaps I had something about that in mind, you know, contrasting with the deception and the decadence that's being expressed there.
Let's go to just a few more of your still lives so that we give people an idea of what we're talking about when you sit and talk about yourself as an artist, perhaps this one. You've worked a lot with still lives lately. I know partly out of necessity, since I went back to, I used to pose, and since I went back to work, I'm never around.
Yeah.
Number two, perhaps right now you need it?
Well, yeah, I've you know, when we lived in New York, I painted outside. I did a lot of drawings and pastels on the street. I have a lot of New York City pictures. And then we moved to the country the past 10 years or so, and I sensed, of course, I have done a lot of landscapes, farm landscapes and rolling country and that kind of thing, gardens and so forth. But lately, the past 4 or 5 years, I've sensed a certain retreating in myself, you know, and I don't know where it's going to stop or where it's going to go. I mean, I sense that I'm trying to regroup my forces. And so I've done a number of still lives. They're brightly, well, yes, richly colored rather than brightly colored.
This is a brilliant red, and this is a bright green teapot. Now, for instance, this is where you'd say a female, it's a soft pink inner shell, which would be a female symbol, and this would be male with the spout and the teapot. Was that conscious?
No, I wasn't thinking of that. I wasn't thinking of that at all. If I look at it, what I was basically aware of was the red of the drape, the cloth that they're on. It's a brilliant red, and then the strong green of the teapot. You know, as I look at the picture, obviously I think I'm using the spout to point up to the Rubens picture there. That's how I'd analyze the picture if I were going to look at it. There's sort of a circular movement, and the horns of the shell point up to the Van Goghs on the right. And, you know, I mean, you can look at the opening of the shell like a mouth, you know, as I analyzed one of Cézanne's pictures in his black clock one time. I'm not sure I was conscious of it. I wasn't thinking of his black clock when I painted it. But, you know, I mean, I've done some with Brooks, and it's basically artists I've admired, and I'm sure there's a symbolic relationship of my selection of pictures, but go ahead. Do you want to move to
Well, should we just go to just the rest of the paintings here, and briefly, and I don't know how much time we have left.
No, we have 7 minutes.
7 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll just
7 or 8.
Show the paintings without comment, or should we comment just a sentence or two about each?
I feel they need some comment. I don't think people know how to look at pictures. You know, to be perfectly honest, you know, there's no point dissembling. That's why I talk about them, and you know, I don't mean to be condescending or unpleasant about it, but I'd rather, since I have the opportunity, I'd rather say something at least minimal.
Okay.
Shall I say something minimal?
Say it.
Okay, this is a statement about some of the horror of life. I deliberately chose Goya. These are two paintings by Francisco Goya. The man on the left obviously laughs out of madness and stupidity. And the head of the sheep and the ribs on the far side obviously are a symbol of death, as they were for Goya, who painted them. So I used them secondhand. Now, if I were a modern artist in the mainstream, I would simply copy the Goya. I wouldn't let the reality of the book exist as a form. I would artificialize it. And
or what about just doing the meat, as say Francis Bacon?
You
Wouldn't you might do that?
Well, I've already done that.
Yeah, I know you have.
I've already done that. So that's basically the story of it, as well as the beauty of the color and the solidity of the forms. I'm very moved by color. I'm very interested in significant form. If the form isn't significant, to me a painting doesn't have one of its major bulwarks.
Was there a conscious symbolism in the broken glass and the choice of two Christmas tree ornaments, which don't show up too well, but they're right here, and then of course the squash with the...
No, I wasn't thinking of the squash. As I look at it, the glass is maybe a little bit obvious, and I'm not sure if I was thinking about it when I did it or not. Now, if there's a weakness to the picture, it might be that it's obvious. We have about 5 minutes.
Okay, let's go down to this painting. Do you think that if you use a symbol that may be apropos, but you've done it consciously, you mean being too obvious diminishes it?
Oh, sure. Being too obvious diminishes anything. And see, I think you can be symbolic as an artist unconsciously or consciously, or a combination of both, but it has to be profound and it has to be significant. I mean, there are all kinds of cheap, surface, pseudo-symbolic artists or paintings that perhaps we could mention. We won't, but if it's profound, I don't think it matters whether it was conscious or unconscious. It's significant. You know, that's the main point.
Do you want to say anything about this, or should we go to the next one?
Well, it's very richly colored in reds and greens and blues.
They
and
are
yellows.
Absolutely vibrant.
And,
I must say black and white is hardly the medium to show them, but...
I don't think I was saying anything except that I wanted to create a jumble of objects that still had a structure to it, and you know, the man on the Savarin can or whatever is Chasen Sanborn. We could talk about, but it's not necessary.
And the next painting?
Well, when we get it up, it's self-portrait with a native and oldest human skull, and there's obvious symbolism in terms of death, and I'm not sure if I thought about it afterwards, that I was thinking of a certain sense of continuity of societies and generations. And, you know, with the back to the oldest human skull, which I got from a photograph, as I did the native head, I did myself in a mirror. And that there was a certain continuity of humanity here, and there was a certain connection between me and my native lifestyle with the headband and the unkempt appearance, which is usually the way I am. Maybe I look that way now. And the native with the crown. There was a certain brotherhood, in a sense, between the two. But it's also about form and color and emotional statement.
Should we go on to more paintings, or should we talk?
Well, whatever you feel comfortable with.
It's up to you.
Well, we only have 3 minutes.
We have 3 minutes.
So whatever you'd like to take a look at.
Well, let's just quickly go, maybe just pan across on these 4 paintings.
Sure. You know, whatever you like.
At least we'll get an idea of your landscapes.
Yeah, I always feel limited by showing any one picture because I've done so many pastels, and this happens to be an acrylic, but I've done so many pastels and drawings and so forth that while you know, there's a glare on it, but we get a feeling.
That's all right.
There's a.
Okay, we can just keep going to the.
Gee, I wish I could have got the sun that brilliant and.
That's okay. It gives an idea of it. Okay, we'll just go down. It's strange that in New York City, we lived here for, I'd say, around 7 years, and you spent so much time out of the studios.
I know.
Freezing cold in Central Park, down in the docks, everywhere.
Yeah.
And you've done quite a few landscapes up where we live now in beautiful country. This is right out in our front yard. But the majority of your work has been in the studio more than when you lived in New York City. You've become more introspective and more...
Very strange. And you know, of course, I see the, I'm not sure what word of the situation, but, you know, here I'm urging people to get out of the studios and get in contact with reality, and I think it's very necessary for a healthful art that this be done. But I guess I'm regrouping my forces. I think I'm finding a meaning for my life in these still lives, in the solidity and the arrangement, the way Cezanne did in his. So I don't apologize for the still lives. I think they're important.
I do too.
But they're different.
I wish we had more time. You'll have to come back as my guest, which you can
well,
very easily.
I'll be happy
I want to
to
talk to you about the artist and marriage, and whether you think it's a help or a hindrance.
Oh, that's a
That's
good
dynamite.
question. That's dynamite.
Thank you for being with us today. I'm Jessie Gray, and my guest has been Don Gray, my husband. Tune in again next